All right, we're live. Locked in, locked on. We are live, and this is Misaligned. Today, we're taking it all the way back to the roots. Why do some nations thrive while others stay trapped in poverty? Is it bad luck? Is it bad leaders? Is it bad systems? Or was it designed to be this way from the very start? Who knows? I don't know. Maybe that's something we might discover through this conversation. It's a bit of a limited pack today from the usual panel. Jab is clearly missing, and we definitely would appreciate his input at some point. He might join, but let's see how we get on with this conversation. Let's unpack the myths of merit, the truth about power, and whether Africa can rewrite the rules of wealth. Yemi, want to open us up?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Cross. Good to be here again, Cross and Farouk. Thanks, everyone else joining us. Why are some nations poor and why are others rich? I I can imagine this is a question that's been asked multiple over and over, you know, in different fora, and perhaps discussed to death. But it's a timeless one, I'd say, and I think it's an important one for us to broach and see what we make of it. In my sort of knowledge, lots of reasons would have been given by different people at different times. Geography, some even said, IQ. Some people are smarter than others. Some have blamed colonialism. It's just wealth extraction. That's all it is, and perhaps many more reasons. So we'll jump straight into it. Um, I suppose the core question is, and we are looking at this mainly from the sort of point of view of Africa, because let's face it, most of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, languishes in poverty, and it'll be helpful to explore why we think that is the case. I don't know if Farouk wants to get us started. Why is Africa poor?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Nice to meet. Nice to meet up again, Cross and Yemi. Last week we discussed free will, and I'd like to link this nicely into the free will debate because I think the matter of free will affects individuals as much as it does societies and even countries. Are we willfully poor? Did we choose to be poor? Well, we'll get to that. I think Cross's introduction hits all of the fundamental drivers of poverty, in my view. He talked about power. He talked about leadership. He talked about design. Are we poor by design? And I think as we get into the conversation, it will become clear that it's all of those factors playing into why we are poor and why we remain poor, and it is by no means our free will to do so. so that's my introduction and my opening pitch to it, and we can take each and every one of it and unpack as we move on. So when we talk about power, I actually mean geopolitical power, the power to dictate the terms of trade, the system of trade, the currency of trade, the power to dictate who your allies are, who your enemies are, who to sanction, who to enrich, who to impoverish. That's at the core of why nations are rich and poor. The strongest nations have traditionally been the wealthiest ones, and their friends and allies are rich. And their enemies and adversaries are poor. Rome was wealthy, the wealthiest for its time. The Ottomans were immensely wealthy. The Mongols were wealthy. The Great British Empire at its height was wealthy. Why? Because it was able to control trade, control the terms of trade, impose tariffs, impose tax, impose fines, and consequently, because of that power and that reach, it could decide who will be poor and who will be rich. Today, we see the current system, I call it the American Empire, impose sanctions on countries like Venezuela, countries like Cuba, with otherwise above average leadership. And because of that structure of power, the power structure, the design of the system, some countries are held poor and some are rich. But that doesn't exist in a vacuum. So when I say one factor is responsible for why countries are rich or poor, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the underpinning factor, that's the driver, and that's the main factor. It's just to explain a correlation that we observe. Venezuela has some of the largest deposits of oil in the world. We know about the Cuban health system, how their doctors are world beating. Leadership is not lacking there for as far as I know. But the empire, the ones that dictate the terms of trade, the roots of trade, the language and currency of trade, for political reasons have kept them where they are. Whereas the empire, for example, when it's aligned with countries like South Korea and Japan, and when it chooses to rebuild Germany or chooses to support, say, Israel, it transfers aid, currency, political, diplomatic, and it develops them. So that's a factor. It's not the only factor. Leadership. Leaders might make choices to either lean in and align with the powerful, recognizing that that's the system. And that's where pragmatism comes into it. So you recognize the system, you recognize the weakness and strengths and limitations of the system. And a leader with vision, a leader not driven by ideology, but rather by wanting wealth and success for his people, prioritizing, leaning into the empire, leaning into power, UAE, Bin Zayed, Singapore, to make some people, his or our own people rich. And again, leadership plays a role. What else was the other point you raised in your opening gambit? So we talk about the system by design. We talk about leadership. What else?
There were a few. We talked about
geography.
Yeah,
geography.
Geography
matters. That's why we see the Middle East today, and for hundreds of years, we see war and conflict there. And the reason is its geography. The Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab al-Mandab Strait. It links Europe, consumers, buyers, they industrialize on time, to Asia. And every empire understands that if I control these trade routes, if I control the resources and the people here, I can extract wealth. I can exert influence. And from the times of Alexander the Great, through the times of the Ottomans, to the British Empire, to the Mongols, empires have clashed over this strategic region. We know when the Ottoman Empire, for example, rose and blocked European trade through the Middle East because they were adversarial to the Europeans. The Europeans then went the other way around in trying to get to the Far East for trade, and that's how they found the so-called New World, and they colonized North and South America, and then obviously extracted a lot of wealth from there, and then became wealthy again. Obviously, again the Ottomans. And the other empires that arose, they're blocking that trade route between East and West, actually led Europe to the Dark Ages, or some people believe it contributed. That lack of interaction with the East and trade led to their decline and centuries of the Dark Ages. But obviously, the ingenuity of trying to find another route took them to the New World. And obviously, some of them trying to navigate around Africa to avoid the Middle East that had been taken over by an adversarial force, came in contact with Africans and then started our own process of colonization. So yes, geography, which then links to your rivers, your mountains, your natural resources, and how you tap into that. So I agree, all of those factors play into it. And then I've touched on leadership. I'll let somebody else speak now. Thank you.
Thanks, Berger. That's a detailed sort of attempt at unraveling lot of the issues. Cross, what have you got to say to this? Bad culture, bad weather. Is there something we're doing that is keeping us poor?
I think it's a very interesting one, and I start off already disagreeing with and completely misaligning with Farouk on just one key component of geography. I don't necessarily think that geography is a key element, just because of the fact that when you factor in the resource curse, I'm sure you've all heard about the resource curse, right?
No? What is it? Tell us about it.
Sure. So the resource curse is basically a paradoxical situation in which we have countries that are rich in resources tend to have the least level of social development, infrastructural development, and financial capability. They also tend to have higher is it export deficit? I forget what the exact words are, which is shameful coming from an economist, but they tend to export more, export less than they import. And they're not very good essentially in being able to build the wealth that they should have. And that's an interesting thing because this applies across the spectrum.
Cross, before you go on, that correlation only holds when you are looking at it for poor countries. It does not hold when you are thinking of Norway, which is resource rich, but also wealthy. It does not hold when you are thinking of Australia, which is extremely resource rich, but also a first world country. It doesn't hold when you're thinking of Canada, which is resource rich, but a first world country. The reason I'm introducing this early on is, yes, there's that correlation when you look at resource rich poor countries that haven't developed wealth. And then we may be waylaid to think that that's the driver. But might it be the overall system? I mean, I cautioned at this nuance when I was talking about all of them having an impact at different levels. So this theory, Russia is the largest country on earth, rich in resources. Canada, a very large country, very rich in resources. Australia also, but so also is Norway, and they are all first world countries with UAE is rich, is resource rich. So this correlation would not apply to these ones. But I give it to you. When you think about resource rich countries like Congo and Nigeria, then you find this correlation you're talking about. So is the problem the resource or something else, in view of the fact that they are very wealthy developed nations as well? I just wanted to put this out there so that you consider it in your analysis.
Yeah, and I did. I think it's worth pointing out that this resource. Chris, I hate these two words. They just don't work very well together. But it applies in a number of different continents. If it was something that was focused on Africa, I would say, okay, well, it's an African problem and it really focuses on culture, etc. But it's not focused on Africa. This also occurs in the Middle East. We look at countries like Yemen, for example, within Asia, Myanmar, Timor-Leste. If you're thinking about South America, Venezuela, Bolivia, it's the same kind of problems that we see across different continents across the world. I think for me, the key thing about that is that it's not necessarily just about any of these things. It's not geography. I think geography is not necessarily the factor. I think there's three key factors in my own assessment, just based off just thinking about this over the past, because we haven't had, as much time usually as we would to think about these topics. But I think there's three key things. One is colonization, and believe it or not, I wish Jab was here. He'd love this one. Colonization, I think, is one of the biggest factors. And if I could throw numbers out there, I don't like throwing numbers. I like to stick with empirical figures and statistical analysis. But I'm going to say somewhere around 60%. Colonization is probably one of the big things. And then the other two factors will probably explain why I think colonization.
Would you again? I just wanted this to be interactive. Would you classify colonization under structure, which I talked about, because that's where I would put it. Where I talked about who determines the terms of trade, the rules of trade, who mans the routes, who imposes taxes and sanctions, who extracts rent from our trade. That's the imperialist. That's the top dog. I think of colonization as being under the structure. Is that where you would place it as well?
I would say it's almost
the system and the structure.
I'll flip it around and I'll say colonization determines the structure rather than
structure. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So I classify both of them together. So when I say a structure plays a role, that's where I'll put colonization, because somebody set the structure up. Yeah, continue.
I agree, but I think it's quite important to lay out what the specific structures are. So for me, I think within colonization, just took some quick notes while we're just talking through that, is one, culture, because colonization affects your culture, determines how you dress, determines what's socially acceptable, etc. It affects your economics. So what kind of economic system do you utilize within that area? Colonization affects that. Your sociology, around how you behave around others, what's acceptable, what isn't. it's being affected by that. Power structures and power systems and power dynamics are affected by colonization. How do you structure power? Are you using through militaristic might? Are you using through more traditional systems like monarchies and ancestralism? Are using it through that changes how that works. And then finally, the institutions themselves. So in terms of having things like the legislative, the judiciary, the executive, etc., all of that exists based off of colonialism, because that affects how we determine what's right. The three arms of power within countries in the world today, especially colonized countries, tend to fall within these three remits, which have been designed under colonialism. So that's the first thing. I think the first part of the challenge is this, and I think I could just jump into pointing this out, that really for me it's about power. Colonization has created a system of power where those who have colonized other countries, other continents, have created a hierarchy of power where they sit at the top because they determine what these institutions are that we've talked about, these five. The second is westernization. It's only three, so I'll be really quick about this one. Is westernization. I think we've moved to a world where westernization has really changed our interests and our focus areas. What it is that matters to us has been westernized. The views, opinions of everybody in the world has now turned to a position where it's all about what the West considers to be important is what we consider to be important. We've completely lost our own sense of value. So we look to a leader which sits in the West to determine what's important for us. And the last one, I think, is capitalism. The use of capitalism has completely changed everything, especially with the introduction of or the revocation of the gold standard and moving to this fiat system, where we've now said, nah, it's not about the gold anymore. It's about governments determining what it should be. And we've determined that we're going to just peg dollar, which means nothing because it's a fiat system, to oil and to most countries' determination of their own currency and power. And this has affected everything because if America sneezes at the moment, it affects the whole world. And we've moved ourselves to the position where everything that we do is predicated off of colonization. So we need to make sure that our culture, economics, sociology, power, and institutions are based off of what's been set for us. That we're westernized, so we follow the Western ideas about what is important, what isn't, and what power is, what resources are important, what good should be produced and what shouldn't. And then finally, that capitalism is the only way for us to be able to provide value in the world. That's what I think.
Thanks, Cross. I think there are two things you've said there. You've said a lot of very important things. Two things particularly that caught my attention, and I would want us to, if possible, spend a few minutes to just maybe just explore those a bit further. So one of it is westernization, is the way you put it. And it's something that I have reflected on previously, is the idea that all we do actually in Africa is play, apart from the other factors that have been mentioned, which I don't disagree with. But there's a fundamental problem that I see, or a problem that I consider fundamental, which is that you are aspiring to be effectively what you're not. So, and I wanted us to talk about whether or not even how we define poverty is a problem to begin with, right? So, because I find that there might be a problem there, because if wealth becomes a proxy word for being able to live in a Western fashion, then it seems to me that we're playing a game we can't win. Certainly not for now, right? And that perhaps we need to get our terminologies correctly, our priorities correctly. And then you said something about capitalism. We could come back to that. But Farouk, is the definition of poverty a problem? Is how we is what we aspire to be itself part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, you're opening up a very interesting aspect, which kind of revolves around our understanding of reality and causation, epistemology, ontology. We will get there. But before I get there, I want to go back to the three key things Cross talked about: colonization, westernization, and capitalism. He also did mention that he thinks that's 60% responsible for why nations are rich and poor. And that links to power. The one that can colonize is the powerful. I'm not sure to the extent power determines whether countries are rich or poor, to the extent that I can quantify it. But I would say that overall, I align with Cross to the extent that I agree that the power structure, the system, the economic system, the governance systems in the world, the enforcement systems all play into why countries remain rich and poor. So I align with you to that extent. And I think all of those three factors you mentioned, I would classify them under the structure. When I talk about the structure, who set the terms of trade, who enforces trade, who monitors the trade routes. There is a reason why NATO has close to 1,000 military bases around the world. There's a reason why key institutions of trade and arbitration of trade are all based in Geneva and New York and in the West. There's a reason why things are set out the way they are set out, because those that set it out for their own interest. So as I align with Cross, we agree that the system as set out by those who set it out is meant to develop themselves. And to the extent it may well be that certain parts of the world are designed through power, through policy, through centuries of colonialism and imperialism to be areas of the world where we tap for cheap resources, cheap labor. It has to be so for the capitalists to get the means of production, to control it, and then make profit. Now, having said that, and having recognized our positioning in the system by design of the powerful and the owners of the system, how do we then adapt and work our way either through the system or build another one? And that gets us to Yemi's point. Do we then remain within a system that was not designed with us in mind, for us to be at the top, and try and compete on the terms set by somebody else?
So if I can give an analogy to what you're saying there.
So if, for example, monkeys have set a system up to assess how they can jump on trees, should we as elephants then assess ourselves by how we can jump? I guess that's the question.
That is the question. Let's put it in another way. So you've got Amazon, right? The boss of Amazon is a billionaire, and in a way, for him to be a billionaire, there has to be hundreds of thousands of people on minimum wage, right? That's how it's set up. So I suppose the question then would be that, is the idea of wealth for the guy on the minimum wage being or becoming Jeff Bezos? It's
impossible.
There you go.
It's right. Impossible. So in a sense, our definitions, our aspirations, our understandings need to reflect our reality. One. Secondly, we need to begin to build our own terms of reference, standard operating procedures, and to reflect our reality. In a sense, not to be ashamed of pragmatically engaging with our reality. I know, Yemi, you and I talked some time ago, and I said, look, for the farmer in Northeast Nigeria, without access to electricity, without access to the mobile phone, because the economy cannot support its extension there should be no shame in using his donkey to farm or his cow to farm, because then that falls from the grass of the land, powers his rudimentary tools, and feeds him and his family.
Yes. So you've got to act sustainably to begin with.
Within that reality.
You think about other sort of...
And then migrating up all the food chain. But then what in reality happens is we then wallow in self-pity about how that farmer doesn't have a tractor. Label him hopeless, fill him with a sense of failure and doom, and fail to engage at the very primary level with our reality. The reality is we are poor. The reality is that we have not industrialized. And the reality is that we don't have the capital to do so, certainly not in the hinterlands and in the mountains of Mambila, where jobs comes from. And when I look at the Chinese model and the Cuban model, and they engaged where they were, and then they moved to where they wanted to be. So I agree with you. Our definitions have to, and our aspirations, and our metrics have to reflect our reality. So we at least measure something that's real to us, and then we can set goals, roadmaps, evaluate, and then move towards where we can and we should be.
I've got some thoughts about this one. If I may, Yemi. It's that the idea that this system wasn't set up for us, and I find that I find that interesting, because very often when we think about something was set up for us, I'm going to use a very, very divisive, possibly analogy of slavery. So slaves would go into slavery and say, well, this system wasn't set up for us. It was. And it's a very similar concept. Once you start considering the fact that colonization as a system, westernization as a concept, and capitalism as an infrastructure to control people, it's pretty damn clear. So to Farouk's point about what he was talking about the farmer, and the farmer is not thinking about, I need to cultivate sufficient crop for my community first before I start moving beyond it, to start thinking about my town.
I mean, for your home first, you might even say.
For your home, exactly. Let me start with my home. If I start thinking about my community, and then I start thinking about my town, and then the city, and then the state, and then we start talking about the nation. What's happened is we've come with this concept that things have been put on top. So we're starting from the top. And we're thinking about
it's a disastrous mindset. Sorry to interrupt you there, but that point is so profound. I can't let you just carry on without almost sitting on the point. It's a disastrous mindset, right? And this is what you have to. I think us as a people, we have to come to terms with this. That is a disastrous mindset, right? You've got to engage with the world through realism. Right, you can't start at the top, and
you can't come to Nigeria and start measuring the number of people with iPhones and the number of people with brick houses, and then you set up to fail.
Absolutely. So I think in that sense, we've got to almost do away with this eye for the top. It's unproductive. I think we've got to learn to pay attention to the simple things and try to do them well. I think, Farouk, we talked about healthcare the other day in another forum where you got a bit of stick for suggesting you wouldn't advocate some kind of level of high-tech medicine in
No,
villages.
I come from a state in central Nigeria. I don't know the most recent census figures, but give or take less than 10 million people, extreme poverty, basic health care is lacking, basic health promotion is lacking, water supply, sanitation is lacking, and you suggest to me to build a state-of-the-art cancer center.
When children are dying of malnutrition.
When children are dying from diarrheal illness, from malnutrition. What are we talking about? Where is the realism in that?
But that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely. That's the point you made.
It's really so we've veered off now into how we engage with the system that we found ourselves with and where we are. But I think it's very important, because it then leads us to that part of the conversation that yes, we are poor. Yes, what do we do about it? That's where we are now. That's essentially the conversation we are having.
Okay. And so what's the role of foreign aid?
What does basic economics tell us? We need to produce to first survive. And when we produce and we survive, then we trade our excesses, right, for profit. And then we do it again and again and again and again. And we have to go back to the basics. And what are the resources we have? At the most basic, we have our land and we have our labor. We then need to bring in expertise, machinery, and capital. And what brings all that together nicely? Purposeful leadership. So ultimately, all said and done, the solution is visionary leadership. Who's going to implement this pragmatism we're talking about? Who is going to sell this goal, this vision? Who's going to unify the people, motivate them, sell a pragmatic, realistic vision? It has to be a leader that rises from the people. And back to the point Cross made, when I say the system is not made for us. What I'm essentially saying is that those with power, with guns, with bombs, with intelligence, created a system to serve them. If we were them, then the system works for us. That's the point essentially that I'm making. And what do? We have a few alternatives. Like China, unify, build our own. Like Singapore, UAE, lean on and be allies with those that own it, trade with them and make the best of it. But it all comes down to visionary leadership. In the end, it is not why we are poor. It is the way to begin to get out of it. Because I think one situation we fall into in Africa, and a lot of us in Nigeria, is to think we are poor because we got poor leadership. It could be framed as a reason we remain poor, but I would agree with Cross here. A big reason why we are poor is because the system is designed that way.
Cross, how do we rewrite the script? And I promise I'm not going to stop your train of thought this time.
I think in order to rewrite the script, we need to really take, and this goes back to a previous conversation that we had. Oh, we lost Farouk. Probably, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5 months ago. But back in the ages of sitting down to say, well, what exactly is our own set of values? So if we pick Nigeria, I'm going to pick a specific place. I could even pick. What's interesting, I've noticed as well. I mean, I'm going to go on a slight tangent and I'll come back. But what I've noticed is that even the Western countries don't even know what their own values are anymore. They've lost it. A couple of years ago, a couple of decades ago, 20 years, 30 years ago, it was pretty clear what the values of the Labour Party or the Conservatives was, or the Tories generally, Tories, Conservatives, etc., or the Democrats or Republicans in America. You knew what they stood for. The right wing versus the left wing was clear. Now it's very difficult to understand what anything stands for in any way. You can't look at the left or the right and understand any meaningfulness to any of the things that's happening. And I think that kind of vital reset is not only necessary here in England, but I think it's also necessary, going back to a previous conversation that we've had, in Africa and in Nigeria specifically, to get rid of those three things. One, we need to get out of that colonial mindset. The idea that the West can determine our culture. Why do we wear suits? I remember we had this conversation before. We shouldn't be wearing suits in 33 degrees heat. That is madness. The reason why they were wearing suits here was because it was cold. But we're going to meetings in Nigeria wearing suits. It is absolutely insane when I think about it. The concept of economics, how we determine what monetary value is. There was a point where we're pegging the naira to the dollar. Why? Why are we following this? I understand to a large extent some of the more African Union perspectives that were being proliferated about how we should have a centralized currency. Maybe we can't necessarily do that, but we should start rethinking this and saying maybe we should peg this against the Chinese currency. Maybe we should peg this against the Saudi Arabian currency. Maybe we should look to rethink how we are dealing with our economics as a concept. Who are our trading partners? Who do we accept funding from? Going back to the thing that you just raised a little bit earlier as well, did you know that Africa has lost more money, over $1 trillion in the last 50 years through illicit financial flows, which is basically money going out from whatever, all the different dodgy things that we do, which is more money than we've received as financial aid, which is incredible. It's a system that doesn't work. We need to change our economics. We need to look at our sociology as well and understand our dynamics. The concepts that we're dealing with these days about some of the gender dynamics and some of these things. I have conversations with Nigerians and Africans who think, I personally, I'm going to take my, put my hands up and say some of these things. I don't believe in 50-50. I don't believe that a man should go, should go take a girl out and then she walks on the left because she's a female and they're equal, and then she should be able to get hit by the car equally, etc.
What has that got to do with Africa being poor?
It still comes back to the idea that if we follow in these cultural norms, there's a higher likelihood we're going to follow with the rest. The other things become important. The clothes that we wear, where do they come from? They come from Western designed, manufactured, controlled systems. Amazon controls the entire world, determines what it is that matters for us in terms of how we dress, the things that matter to us on a day-to-day basis that we buy, etc. We need to take that back, the things that matter from that perspective, from a sociological perspective. The structure of power needs to change. I do not believe in democracy in Africa. I know this is a radical take that I'm saying here, but I'm not saying that democracy in the terms of people being able to say what they should say. I'm saying in the current form as it exists needs to be removed. The idea that we need to go to a ballot and then we follow this balloting system of a bunch of different people who can tell us the worst possible thing and there's nothing we can do, and then there for 4 years, etc. The Western concept needs to end. We should probably go back to a more monarchical system, possibly. I'm not sure what the solution to this is, but we need to change the existing system. This democratic system that's inherited, from the West needs to end. The institutional structure, we need to change that as well. The way we deal with things. Previously, you have a ballet, right? That's a Yoruba thing, I think. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. I don't know. Yemi, please tell me, because your name is Yemi, so I imagine you know this a little bit more than me. But
don't be too sure about that. But that pronunciation seems pretty good to me. But
fair enough. Previously, you'd have, and Wole Soyinka wrote a couple of books, and I can't remember. There was the Beauty and the Bride and the Lion and the Bride. I can't remember what it was, but it was a good example about a system where the older systems, where it was where judgment and the judiciary, the legislation was handled by people based off wisdom, experience, etc., rather than it being a political tool of an inherited system. We need to change these things.
Okay. So I've got another question, if you guys don't mind, and I think I'm going to almost want to pin you down for another 5 minutes on that point. I apologize for that, because you've just reeled out some very important points about almost rediscovering ourselves, which I doubt many people will disagree with you about. But I've got a challenge for you. Whilst I don't disagree that can be helpful, it also still begs this problem. It almost exposes this problem of the definition of poverty again. Because even when we were doing all these things that you talk about, we were poorer than we are now, right? Judging by the terms of how we are defining poverty now, we were poorer then. But
I mean, think about it. How do we define poverty? The poverty line is based off $1 a day. So even how we define how we are poor in a country or in a continent where we don't even use that currency on a day-to-day basis, we're defining our own economic capability of a foreigner's idea.
And I think Farouk also mentioned about housing the other time, and people who live in mud houses will be termed to be homeless under some circumstances, won't they? Not properly housed, which again.
According to whom? Who's determining? Yeah, it's like who's determining whether or not? Because again, for me, the idea about I think it's $1 a day.
So, Cross,
Sorry, Farouk.
if I summarize it, if I
Wait, Farouk,
summarize what you're saying,
wait, Farouk. Let me land this one because I think this one's important to put out. What it used to be was that $1 a day was absolute poverty. If you're earning less than $1 a day, was absolute poverty. The issue with that is that we're now importing a system, and I'm saying this because I did my NYSC, in those states. I didn't do the whole thing. I'll be perfectly, and I transferred to Lagos, and I finished off in Lagos. But I did sufficient time there to be able to see what it was like to experience that level of poverty. And I saw a situation where these people are not, they don't even know what $1 is. This is foreign concept, or it's a foreign concept to them to think about $1 a day. They want to eat and they're cooking their own food. These are people who had their own on the road. You're driving down and you see a little farm in that corner, and they've got they're planting their potatoes or their yam, and they've got their pigs and chicken. They're not thinking about $1 a day. It's a strange concept, but we've decided to create our definition of poverty, of wealth, etc., off of a foreign dynamic. Farouk, floor is yours.
yeah, I mean, if I can summarize all you're saying, Yemi has used the word rediscover ourselves. I'm sure Jobs would say we need to decolonize our minds. Okay? Yeah, so that speaks to the same thing. And then you talk about our systems and institutions. You talked about democracy, monarchy, and you touched on a few things. Why do you think the system hasn't worked for us or isn't working for us, whereas it's worked for South Korea, it's worked for Singapore, and it's worked for Israel, because they all have colonial systems imposed on those geopolitical constructs, and it's worked for them. Why is it that in Africa it's not worked for us? I have my own thoughts about it, but what do you think is the reason, Yemi and Cross, or are the reasons?
Yemi, do you want to go first?
So I think we've touched on some of it already. I think as it stands, is in no one's interest apart from just Africans for it to work for Africans. It doesn't, I can't put a finger on why it'll be in anyone else's interest to begin with. So it seems that the onus, all of that then falls on Africans. I see just over $1 billion.
And because it's in no one's interest, might it be the case that it's been sabotaged purposefully?
Yes and no. So I think it's the use of language. I don't disagree that there is sabotage. I tend to like to frame it slightly differently. I think, and I want to do that for a reason. I think lots of people who can get themselves a bit stuck in this, it's all the West's fault, as if we can just get rid of them and chase them out, we'll be fine. I don't think so. I think what it is that when you're in an abusive relationship, right, you need to look in the mirror as much as you need to look outwards. Okay, it's not enough to simply get rid of the abuser. Often there are things that you're doing also to make. Again, this is not blaming the victim, but we know that this is how it is. There are things that you also do that sustains an abusive relationship. So if all your focus is to get rid of the abuser, what you will end up with, and this tends to happen quite commonly in interpersonal relationship, is another abuser, because you just carry on behaving in the same way that you normally behave, and you'll attract another one. And that's why I don't feel like I need to spend all my energy sort of almost cursing the abuser. I think, we can also look inwards and understand not just what we're doing, but what are the dynamics of this relationship? How can we alter it from our point of view, right? But it seems to me that we've got 1 billion plus divided people who are not just divided, but are increasingly aspiring to be like their oppressor. I think it's a toxic mix. You've got you're so many of you, you're scattered around, you disagreeing with each other, sometimes fighting and killing each other, but also desiring to be like the one who's benefiting from this chaos. Like, this is never going to work to me. So I think the first thing we need to do, which is why I agree with Cross and Farouk, what's been said, is you need to look inwards and you need to rediscover yourself. I think there are many different ways that we might do that. And I think both of you have mentioned, I won't bother to go over those, but again, my feeling is that there's not one way that this can be done. I think there can be more than one ways, which is why I'm happy to engage with all kinds of proposals that people bring in. But whatever it is, we need to look inwards and we need to find a purpose that comes out of our own personalities, out of our own history, and begin to work ground up rather than thinking that except Lagos is like New York in 15 years, then we haven't achieved anything, which is where this almost a sort of cycle of despair and nihilism comes in. And again, that would be my take, just to put it kind of simply.
So two emergent themes here that I want to kind of highlight. One, we need to rediscover self, decolonize. And Yemi, are you touching at saying we also need to unite? And when you talk about 1,000 people, 1 billion people pulling in all different directions, aspiring to be like the oppressor, does that hint at a need to come together?
It needs to come together, certainly for the purpose of being able to bargain. And I think a lot of people worry about this when you talk about the need to come together. So I'm not saying, the Fulani man should become, even within the same country. I'm not saying the Fulani man and the thief man should become, the same culture. No. This is not what I'm saying. You can be yourselves, but also recognize areas in which your alignment in and values and aspirations can work together for you. Is like a football team. Everyone doesn't have to be a goalkeeper for the team to work properly. What you need to do is to understand each other and understand that you sink or swim together. I put it to people who talk about every other thing apart from Africa coming together and rediscovering itself, the poor leadership, which I don't deny for 1 second. But I ask, if virtually the whole of sub-Saharan Africa is experiencing, to an extent, these problems that we're talking about, then certainly there's a shared future, right? There's a shared destiny here. Certainly so far, our destiny has been shared. And it seems to me that we've got to come together.
Are you making the same mistake? Are you making the exact same mistake again that's caused us to be where we are, where you're looking at the top, where they've determined that sub-Saharan Africa, you're all the same. We've colonized you within our own Anglo-Saxon sort of idea about how we control the world and establish structures and institutions, and you're going back to that.
No, I don't think that that's what it is. I think you can rediscover yourselves, your identities, and still present a shared front. We see the EU. It's not perfect, but we see the EU doing it brilliantly. The Belgians are very different from the French in pretty much the same way that a southwestern Nigeria might be very different from a Central African Republic tribe somewhere.
Say they're doing it brilliantly, though. I'll say they have lots of issues within the EU.
Oh yeah, you will always have issues. Even families have issues. This is the reality of the human condition. That you're thriving doesn't mean you won't have issues.
Yeah, but the EU established all the countries. No. The countries within the EU first established their own baselines. They determined who they were first.
Yeah.
All of these countries have strong historical backgrounds and they have strong national identities and they know who they are. So you look at the Schengen is a good example. All the countries within the Schengen, they all have the strong rich histories. They know who they are. You're never going to confuse Germany for France. It's not going to happen. You know who they are. Do you know what I mean?
You could
And
say you could say the same for ethnic nationalities within Nigeria. I'm pretty sure the TIFF people know who they are. I'm pretty
yes,
sure that you can work with them to promote those values and establish them and increase self-awareness. I'm pretty sure the Igbos know who they are.
but do
I
they want
don't
to be
need to tell you that.
Nigeria though?
Sorry?
They're stuck in a country that a lot of them do not necessarily even want to be. They were not part of the conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Nigeria didn't exist because people had a conversation and
I
said,
think I think a lot of that is overstated, and I push very strongly on it. You were born to a family that you didn't have any conversation about. I think people overstate this. I didn't have a conversation about something. You sometimes, if life gives you lemon, right, you have to make lemonade. That's all.
"Not in this
You've
case."
got to make lemonade and find someone. Someone else might say who's got vodka, and have a party. This is
Yeah,
how it
yeah,
is,
no, but
right?
no, but I disagree with this one just because it's one thing when you have a blood lineage that it's like, well, okay, I've got a family and I don't like this family, fine, but
Uh,
we're blood.
maybe
There's some relation.
cross on this
Yeah.
matter, and I'm aligned with Yemi and misaligned with you. And the simple reason is of the close to 200 or just over 200 countries we have on Earth, there are
Mhm.
very few of them that had a conversation before they became a country. Nigeria is not unique in that sense. Neither is Saudi Arabia or South Africa or China
No,
or
no,
Japan.
no,
Okay.
no, no, no,
Yes,
no, no, no.
we've got nationalities that have a sense of peoplehood that spans uh, 100 centuries. But for a vast majority of countries,
No, no,
they were carved
no, no.
from the
Mm,
empire dividing things in its own interest. Certainly, most of
yeah, no, no,
sub-Saharan
no, no, no,
Africa.
no, 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 no. No, I disagree. I mean, I'm willing to hear examples of where I'm wrong about this one, but most of the time, these determinations tended to be internal versus external. Nigeria was externally determined.
as
Mr.
as as was most
Lord Lugard.
as was most of Africa.
Exactly, it's the same thing I was saying, and then we tend to have loads of these same
Same
crises
with most of
occurring
South
across Africa.
America. Same with the Middle
And a
East.
lot of them have very similar crises as well. Again, my issue
How did Saudi Arabia come to be?
Exactly the same way as Nigeria was.
was it this I don't know because I haven't studied as much about
I
Saudi
mean,
Arabia as
the Middle East was carved off by Sykes-Picot, consequent upon today's
it
Middle
was,
East was
was called
carved
the
off
company,
by
right? It was one of the companies.
Sykes-Picot, the
Cross,
British and French empires after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire.
cross, cross,
They
cross,
decided the
cross,
boundaries.
cross. I would put it to you and
Mhm,
people who make this point. Whilst I
mhm,
see the sort of intuitive nature of it, what I would say to you is what you need to think about when you've got an issue is what
mhm,
is in your interest, right?
mhm.
And how you operationalize it. Okay, I take your point. Nigeria wasn't, it was an, for us as Nigerians, it's an afterthought,
Externally
right?
imposed
It's an
across
accident.
500
Yes,
different ethnic
for us
groups.
as Nigerians, it was an accident, right? But we've got the situation that we are in now, right? What is in your interest? To break it all up or to try to make it work as it is?
We probably need an
To
episode
me,
on this one.
that's
I
the
think
only
I'd like
question
to.
we need to answer.
I would like to have a whole episode where we discuss this specific
Yeah.
topic because I think this could be quite interesting to a number of different people, and particularly to me. I'll be honest, I'm going to be selfish
Yeah,
on
yeah,
this
yeah.
one. I'd like
Let's
to hear.
pen it down. Let's pen it down for another
Yeah, let's
episode.
break it down and have this conversation from this group and all of all of us here to really talk about this particular issue about whether or not because separating what we're talking about from the richness and the poverty, etc. I have questions about whether or not countries like Nigeria, which have an extremely diverse ethnic population and cultural complete disconnect in some areas, should that be one country? And can we be more prosperous if we're separated into multiple
The
different
problem you
countries?
will
I'm
run
not
into
pushing
in
either
Nigeria,
way.
the
To be clear,
problem
I'm
you
not
would
pushing
run into
either
Nigeria, even
direction.
thinking about this at all, is that so you've got states like Kogi State or Delta State, where
Mhm.
even single cities, You've got multiple ethnic groups that have the same issues that you're talking about on a mic. So what are you going to do about Wari or Lokoja? Are you going to carve it into multiple parts? Like,
Possibly. It
sorry?
depends on what the people want. So it's worth looking again.
So
And sorry, one second. Just to answer him. I need to answer him. Just taking it away, you need to again do the same thing we've talked about. Separate the top-down capitalistic, foreigner view that they've imposed on us, and start from the bottom. Start from the grassroots. What do the people want?
No, it's not just what they want. I agree with you. You have to think about what they want, but you cannot just think about what they want. You have to think about what they need. Sometimes what people want.
No, but who determines what they need? We're going back to the same thing about why nations are rich or poor.
Let me finish.
Who determines it?
No, let me finish. So Farouk posted a video of the Singaporean leader.
Perhaps it's time to share it with our viewers.
Yes,
before we go there, let's look at a quick summary of where we're at. Why nations are rich and poor. There's an alignment that it's the structure, is the system, it's the top dog. How we get out of it, it appears to be an alignment that we need to decolonize and rediscover ourselves. We need to form bigger blocks to trade, to negotiate, to bargain. Now to the crux of the matter. Who leads this process? Play that clip and then
let's watch that clip very quickly, because it touches on this issue that you're raising about who decides.
Yes.
Let's do it. All right, so fair use, Singaporean story, TikTok. I'll link the channel in the chat just for clarity. But let's go.
Thank you. I get the choice. I think the sound's gone.
No volume, Cross.
There was volume at the start, then it disappeared.
So no sound. Sorry, it's just
there was sound at the start, then it fizzled out.
Ah, gotcha. I know exactly what that was. All right, so let's start again. Technical issues. We do this live. Everyone who's watching, we do this live. You got it?
Yeah, it's not rolling yet, but it's up. Still no sound.
So it's playing, but there's no volume. Cross, there's no volume. No volume.
Yeah, I think we can just talk about. I think we've listened to it before, isn't it? I'll tell you essentially what I gleaned out of it when I watched it earlier. So this guy is basically just saying he imposed his will on the system.
Okay.
That's essentially. So you've got a leader who had a vision, who had a reasonably small country, who just imposed his will. So imposed his will on the country, and it worked. So the point I'm making there, I'm not glorifying dictatorship, right? But I am saying that at some point, right, leaders have to stand up. And I remember I was having this conversation at the in another forum as well, where people were making the case that in Western countries, it's the people's attitudes that informs the law. And I showed them very clearly that that's not always the case. Even though that's the case majority of the time, that's not always the case. There have been cases in the UK, for example, where MPs have been at odds with the public opinion for decades on the death penalty, for example. For decades, the opinion of MPs was totally at odds with the population, and the MPs
Yeah.
insisted on it.
There are many good. There are many good examples. The decision to go to war in Iraq, the COVID mandates.
The decision to go to war in Iraq.
You can't. No, you can't. I'm sorry. You can't use those because
the COVID lockdowns.
No,
so there are many decisions to raise taxes.
No, you can't just throw these. You're throwing them. You're just throwing them and saying it like it means something extraordinary. The Iraqi war led to the end of, at that point, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservative government coalition was finished. This was prior to that. Sorry,
it was Labour.
It was Labour. Then what happened? We got 14 years of the Conservatives. That's exactly what happened. COVID mandate. What happened?
No. You are discussing. You are having a different Cross. You are having a different conversation.
And Labour supported the war.
Cross. You are having a different conversation. What Yemi was saying is that there are times in leadership where a leader assesses the need of the people. He's got the mandate already, either through competence or democracy, and imposes the government on the people. And they impose. And I give the example of very widely unpopular policies like lockdowns that polls after polls show that the people didn't want it. But the government went ahead and did it in the public interest. Of course, what you are saying is that there may be a price to pay in future, but that's not what Yemi is saying.
That's fine. So
Yemi is saying that leaders impose the price. Yeah, there may be a price to pay in future. But the point is, the point is, leaders can impose reality based on their assessment of need on the people.
Not in the current system of democracy, and this is why I say we need to change the system.
No, you can do it even in democracy. That's no. In democracy,
but then you lose.
That's fine.
But that's fine. That's a secondary thing.
Wait. The reason why I'm saying this is not a realistic approach to dealing with it is because most governments are unable to make those decisions in the first place because, one, they're too concerned about their own positions, but two, the cabinets won't let them. That's my issue. My issue is that it's not a realistic assumption.
Cross, your issue is tangential to the point Yemi has made. Your issue is correct. I recognize those limitations. So, for example, polls after polls, even of Donald Trump's supporters, overwhelmingly do not support attacking Iran.
Yes.
He's done anyway. Yeah. You are saying he's going to pay the price, but what Yemi and I are saying is that he has the ability to impose his own will.
He can impose it, and sometimes not just the ability, the responsibility under certain circumstances.
Yes. The point is you cannot rely on somebody's. You can't rely on an arbitrary elected official to think the way you're thinking, because you need to remove those consequences from them for them to do what's right. Because the moment you're putting I'm only shaking my head.
I'm just shaking my head. Am I not allowed to shake my head
first? Let's hear it. So the moment you start putting disincentives for people in power to make the right decision, you are going to end up.
The right decision is always disincentivized in life. For you to, even in your own personal life, you to do the right thing, you often have to pay a price.
Bola Ahmed Tinubu came to power and within days removed fuel subsidy and liberalized forex. If you left that to a referendum for Nigerians, he would never be able to do it.
Why are you
the point I and Yemi are making is that he can do it and he has a responsibility to do it. If having gotten the mandate, he understands that, or he determines that that's what's best for Nigerians. The point you are making, which I also agree with you, is that there may be or there will be electoral consequences for that. So that's why I say
No,
the
I'm not making
conversations
that.
are different.
I'm not necessarily making that point at all. I'm
But
making
that's
the
what you're
point
saying.
about
And because
no.
there are
Okay,
consequences,
no.
some leaders cannot make those decisions.
No. So what I'm saying is the institutions are designed in a way, and this goes back to again the main topic of conversation today about nations being wealthy or not. Wealthy nations, the politicians cannot be as abrupt or as decisive because there's so many other factors that apply to them. First of all, they're not as wealthy as the Nigerian politicians. Bola Tinubu doesn't give a damn about what anybody thinks. He's a multi billionaire. Doesn't care. He's like he's not
China,
there.
China is the wealthiest country on earth today, using the purchasing power method.
Yep.
The leadership there makes swift decisions. UAE is extremely successful and prosperous, as is Qatar and Saudi Arabia. The leaders then make decisions and impose on all of their population. So
neither of them are capitalistic.
I'm not sure.
They don't have democratic systems in place. They have highly authoritarian systems. Although
I think what you might be at risk of doing here, Cross, is taking your disdain for democracy and turning it into the discussion.
I don't have a disdain for democracy. I didn't say that.
No.
What was in my mouth?
Not disdain. Your prescription of democracy for Africa. So you're not prescribing it for Africa, right?
My analysis about the relevance of current democratic systems in Africa for Africa. That's my challenge. Yes.
But the point that I am making is that irrespective of the manner of governance, right? Irrespective of it, you still need that. No. Wait. No. I haven't even made the point, and you said I can't say that. You haven't even heard what it is that I'm saying.
Hands up.
So irrespective of the type of government, what I'm saying is that you will need strong leaders that would at some point be able to take decisions in the interest of the people as they perceive it, even when significant numbers of the people oppose it. We've seen it in Singapore. It's been done. And you have to, even in these wealthy Western countries that you talk about, if you the further back in history you go, the more it becomes like that, where decisions just get taken by the powerful and those in control. And even till now, there's still lots of decisions that are taken in national interest or security reasons that the public don't even have a clue. They're not even consulted at all, right? And they'd say, this is national security, and that's that, right?
I never said people should be consulted. I never said that.
So the point I'm making is that if people in a small state of 2 million people in Nigeria want to all break up into 5 different countries, you need to have strong leaders there who say, no, this is not going to work, and use every skill of leadership, negotiation.
Why don't you have strong leaders say it's going to work? Why don't you have strong leaders say yes, it's going to work? Why is it?
Because it's not going to work if you break up.
Why?
Nigeria,
because you are the strong leader.
No.
All the strong leaders telling everybody it's going to work.
No. The point I'm making is that as big as we are, we're still being pushed about by stronger powers, right? The smaller we become, the easier that gets. It just becomes infinitely easy to just push us around. Just imagine India today broken up into 70 countries. Whether or not it'll be the India that we talk about today that's an emerging force in international diplomacy, technology, military might. Of course, it won't be. It'll be 70 little countries that will be pushed about.
Again, you're determining their success off of colonialism, the standards set by colonialism.
No, I'm not.
Capitalism.
No, I'm not.
But again, hold on. And westernization. We're focusing on their own systems. There's no reason why we can't just say, we're not using any of these systems anymore. Right now, we're going to start using cashew nuts as a standard currency.
Where you can't do that because it's now an international market.
I can't. Sorry, I can only hear one at a time. So what did
Right,
you say?
Farouk.
I think whatever the prescription is, I mean, I don't disagree with breaking things up and tearing things down anyway. Whatever the prescription is, you still need that leadership that
Yeah,
sees it that way. And it's not going to deliver on any mandate by doing referendums on every decision.
I never said we should get referendums. I did not say
No,
that throughout this conversation. I
you
said
will
that.
get to power, hopefully, by some democratic means, and
No,
then put a team
I don't
together.
think that. I don't. No,
Uh,
I don't. I
put, a
disagree
team,
with that.
put a team together that then delivers on the interests of the people. And that will be driven by group interest, national interest, and what's best for the people. Uh,
Meritocracy.
I think that's a big word. How
It
it
is a
plays out,
big, it's a
It
word
is.
that cross a lot,
how
Is
it
a lot
plays
of
out in reality, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's a useful thing to aspire to.
meritocracy. We appoint our leaders through SAT tests. That's it.
that one day. But
So, guys, I think we should uh, all think about wrapping up now. We're an hour and 10 minutes. We've missed Job's perspective, but I think we've kind of gone into this, thought about what makes nations poor, talked about some of the ways we can address it, and what are our final thoughts, Yemi?
No, I think we've had a fantastic conversation. I think like most complex things, this is complex, multifactorial. There's a lot of things. I think we've brushed it in a reasonable way. I think there's a system in place that, as it stands, doesn't doesn't have anything to gain from Africa thriving really, and so the onus is on Africans. And I think that means a lot of self-reflection. I do agree that the system is a problem, and I think it's fine for colleagues who want to think very strongly about the behaviors of the custodians of the system and what we do about that. I spend more time focusing on the behaviors of the victim, and I don't, I'm not saying one's more valid than the other. I think both perspectives are needed, and but I spend more time thinking about the perspective of the victim and what we can do to put ourselves in a stronger position. And for me, I think one of the biggest two things that I see is that we need to rediscover ourselves. We need to redefine what it means to be Africans. We need to redefine what prosperity means to us. And it's not university undergraduates being able to all have shiny iPhones. Certainly not to me. I'm sure there'll be people who push back on my ideas of that, but I think it's being able to have safe communities where farmers can farm, and people can have basic health care and good education, and we can begin to develop local technologies to scale things up and make us more self-sustaining and powerful. To me, that's what prosperity would look like, certainly in the short term. And I think following on from being able to rediscover ourselves in that way, we then need to band together. I think all of this, I mean, if you go and see some of what Africans are doing to Africans, even on social media, you think, we've got a long way to go. We've got to bridge some of this divide. If the Welsh and the English and the Scots are online just cursing each other this way, do you know what I mean? And I think this is part of what our conversations should be, sort of awakening our people to say, people divided against itself, they can't stand.
Thank you. Cross?
I think my view still stands. Why are some countries rich and why are other countries poor? Well, one, colonization. It's created a substrata of characteristics that determine how a society is successful. One, culture. Two, economics. Three, sociology. Four, power. Five, the institutions that work. Two, westernization. We've westernized the world. So it's more about being Western rather than being useful or providing value. And then three, capitalism. the economic system that's being utilized across the world is more focused on what the West has imposed on all of us. That's the reason. And all the rest of it comes from that. The resource curse, etc., all these other bits and bobs, all just derivatives of these key things. And I've understood it different. I mean, we've had a few segue conversations off the back of the things that we've talked about. But I think fundamentally, these are the biggest things that I think are the reasons why. And I think the key focus areas for us to be able to deal with these things are: one, decolonizing ourselves, which could include things like one, well, no, I'm not even going to go into substrata, but just we could just decolonize by looking at the structure of countries like Nigeria and determining if Nigeria should be Nigeria for Nigeria's sake or just because we're designed as Nigeria. We need to look at westernization, and should we be behaving the way we behave, accepting the things we accept as part of our ways of living and our values. And the cultural values is a big thing. And then understanding whether or not capitalism should be replaced by something else. Socialism, I don't agree with that. I'm not a socialist, and me and Jab had a very low. First time we met, we talked for like 3 hours and we were arguing about this. And that led to us being here on this podcast because of that argument. And I think that's my key. Those are my key things. Those are the key reasons why.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to focus on solutions. I'd say leadership, trade. We are all aligned on the fact that the structure is holding us back. So what's the landscape like? The Chinese are building another structure. And that in itself is a positive thing. We've got new development banks, new trade routes, new control systems, a new Confucianist peace philosophy on the landscape. And for the first time in generations, as Africans, we can engage with a new system. Well, just as Jabs and just as Cross and Yemi have identified already, and I completely align with, whatever the system, we mustn't engage with it from this defeatist and inferiority complex perspective. Even as we are engaged with the Chinese, we must not use Chinese metrics, Chinese standards. We should just see it as an alternative that for the first time in generations gives us the ability to bargain, the ability to choose, choice. And that's our first level of power. But in all we do, self-rediscovery, decolonization, coming together, putting our interest first, and then engaging with the multilateral plural system that is emerging. That's the landscape for us. That's an opportunity for our generation and our children's generation. I think the outlook is better, much better, because for the first time in generations, we have access to capital and technology for ports, for railways, for airline, for railways, for airports, access to political support, access to finance, and access to the Chinese market. 1.3 billion people rapidly getting wealthy, thirsty for our resources, thirsty for our labor, and we now have the ability to look east, to look west, and say, this is how much I'll sell my cocoa. In return for that, I want technology transfer. We've never, in the last 500 years, we've never had this. We went through a century plus of abject brutality under colonialism and then imperialism. And then for the first time, Africans have a choice. So trade, leadership. Thanks. That's it from me. And I think, Cross, you can sign out now after any word you've got. Thank you.
Got nothing else to say, Yemi? You're the mod.
Oh, great. Thanks everyone for joining us, and see you again next week. Same time. Have a great week.
Same time, same place. Misaligned signing out.
Yeah.